There is an abandoned place known as the Royal Hawaiian Motel. It has been deserted for, as far as I can tell, more than 10 years. I often go on solo urban exploration trips, sometimes even during the night. The motel sits in Baker, California, where the daytime heat can become unbearable. It gets far too hot to wander around carrying my backpack, so I decided to visit the motel after dark instead. I parked along the roadside and walked over. There was no fence to climb or barrier to deal with, and there was no sign of security either. It was honestly one of the easiest locations I have ever explored. Behind the building, there was a very deep pool covered in heavy graffiti. I pointed my flashlight toward the motel itself and noticed that about half of the doors to the upstairs rooms were slightly open or completely broken. It looked unsettling, though not surprising considering how long the place had been abandoned. Clearly, others had been there before me. Part of the structure also appeared to have been caught in a fire and partially destroyed. It was quite late, and there was no sound of traffic nearby. Aside from the noise of my shoes crunching over debris, something suddenly made my blood run cold. I heard a voice somewhere close by. It sounded like a woman. My immediate reaction in situations like this is to assume it might be security or someone who could cause trouble, so I usually step out of sight and hide. That is exactly what I did. I hurried into one of the ground floor rooms and switched off my flashlight. I waited for about a minute, and when I heard nothing else, I turned it back on. I looked around the small room. The walls were covered in graffiti. There was only one piece of furniture, a small dresser with about 4 drawers, along with an old, dusty mattress lying on the floor. I wondered if homeless people might use this place to sleep, but it seemed too far removed from any real civilization for that to be likely. I stepped back outside and continued exploring the motel. I checked every opening along the ground level beneath the walkway above. Each room looked much like the others, filled with random graffiti, scribbles on the walls, and worn-out furniture. Then I heard a crashing noise from above, as if something had fallen. My heart skipped. I stepped back outside and aimed my flashlight up toward the walkway and the broken glass doors. I felt a rush of adrenaline as I decided to head upstairs and investigate. Deep down, I assumed it might just be an animal, but there is always the possibility of running into other explorers or even someone living there. I went upstairs and glanced into each room I passed. They were all similar, filled with junk, debris, old mattresses, and random pieces of furniture. As I continued along the walkway, I started to hear a banging sound. It grew louder the closer I got. It was steady and slow, like thump, pause, thump, pause, thump. Someone else was definitely there. I moved toward the door of the room where the sound was clearly coming from. Just as I got close, it stopped. That made me uneasy. Maybe they had heard me. I called out, saying I was just exploring and meant no harm. I leaned in slightly with my flashlight turned off. It was nearly pitch black inside, but I was fairly sure I could make out the shape of a person near the back wall. The smell inside the room was awful, like strong feces. I pointed it at the floor first, then slowly raised it as I looked back into the room. That was when I saw 2 pale bare feet rushing toward me. Without thinking, I jerked the light upward and fully revealed a woman. Her forehead was covered in blood, and there was a yellow substance around her open mouth. It looked like something straight out of a nightmare. I immediately ran. As I fled, I could hear her screaming behind me. I rushed down the stairs and out of the building, running all the way back to my car. She did not follow me that far. I quickly called one of my close friends, George, who is also into urban exploration. I had originally invited him to come along, but he could not make it. I told him everything that had just happened. We both came to a disturbing conclusion that the banging sound I heard earlier was likely her hitting her head against the wall, which would explain the blood on her forehead. When I wondered out loud if I should contact the police, he strongly advised against it since it would mean admitting that I had been trespassing. I drove around nearby, passing places like Taco Bell and a few other stores, hoping to find a payphone so I could report the situation anonymously. Of course, payphones are basically non-existent now, so that effort went nowhere. In the end, I called the non-emergency number and reported a dangerous and unstable woman, claiming that I had only heard about her from someone else. I kept my explanation as vague as possible and then hung up. I did not want to stay in the area any longer, so I left. I have no idea if the police ever went to check it out, but whatever was going on with that woman, she clearly needed serious help. In all my years of exploring, I had never experienced anything like that. A few years back, I was living in a small town. My family chose to move us about 4 hours away to escape all the chaos. While my parents were out of town looking at houses, I invited a friend over and called my cousins so we could go on a small road trip. The destination I had in mind was basically off limits, but we were thrill seekers and wanted to feel something frightening. We chose a place around 2 to 3 hours away called Bryce Hospital. People said it was haunted because of its past. It used to be a psychiatric institution where people with mental illness were kept. There were stories that some patients had been abused and even tortured. As fewer people stayed there, the facility was eventually closed. As time passed, the structure began to decay and get overtaken by nature. We decided to leave around 11 at night so we could arrive close to 2 in the morning. The drive was enjoyable, and we were all excited about what we might discover. We got there at about 2:43 in the morning and stopped at the start of the dirt road leading up to it. We stayed there for a few minutes, wondering if we should really go through with it since we already felt uneasy. After about 10 minutes of staring into the darkness, we chose to continue. As we drove down the road, it seemed endless. The grass was overgrown and branches were scattered everywhere. It was completely dark, and we could barely make out the path ahead. Eventually, we reached the building, and when we did, we all just stared in shock. It was enormous. The roof had fallen apart, and vines covered the walls. In the center of what used to be the parking lot stood a large old fountain, also covered in vines. It was so dark that we could only see what the headlights revealed. We turned off the car and stepped outside. We started walking into the building, and the first thing I noticed was pentagrams painted all over the walls. We climbed a ladder and reached what remained of the roof. While looking around, we spotted a light at the front of the building. It seemed like a phone light. We called out, but no one responded, and the light disappeared just as quickly as it showed up. My cousin told us to follow him into another room so he could make sure everything was safe, but I had a really bad feeling. I wandered into a nearby room instead. Inside, I saw old mattresses and more graffiti. I could hear my cousins talking when suddenly I heard a faint noise. It sounded like someone had thrown a rock at the window in the room I was in. I ignored it and kept looking around. I went back to my cousins and friend, and we decided to check out the basement. We sat there catching our breath until we heard a voice coming from the back of the room. We all froze and looked at each other. I was too scared to move, afraid that whatever was there might come toward me. My cousin slowly walked toward the sound and shined his light around. He slowly backed away while keeping the light on the figure. When he returned to us, he helped us climb out and then pulled himself up. Once we were out, he called out to the man, asking if he was okay. The man turned around and stared at us with an empty expression. There was a brief silence before the man suddenly started screaming wildly. He began running straight toward us. We all screamed and ran. I remember running and shouting because I could hear him right behind me. My cousins were far ahead, and I could see their flashlights slowly fading. I ran into so many trees that my whole body began to hurt. Eventually, I caught up to them in an open area. We found a trail and tried to make our way back to the car, but we went the wrong way for about an hour before deciding to turn around and try the other direction. The journey back was exhausting, but we finally saw the building again and felt relieved knowing the car was close. As we got near the car, we heard movement in the bushes nearby. Just like before, a rock flew out and hit my friend. Then we saw the man come out of the bush, and we had to sprint to the car. As we ran, he was far enough behind that we managed to get inside and lock the doors. We started the car, and when the headlights came on, they showed the man running toward us. He began hitting the windows while holding a glass bottle. We quickly put the car in drive and sped away. The entire drive home, none of us spoke. We all seemed to share the same shock. My body would not stop shaking. After that night, we never wanted to explore abandoned places again. This took place in rural Georgia. I was 15 then, and my brother Seb was 18. Seb loved checking out eerie locations, and he had heard about a massive abandoned house not too far from where we lived. He didn't want to go alone, so one day he asked me to come with him to explore it. He parked the car in a secluded spot, hidden by a cluster of trees. From where we parked, the house itself couldn't be seen. We had to walk down a concrete road that clearly hadn't been maintained in years. Large cracks ran through it, with grass and weeds growing up all over. Then we noticed a woman walking behind us in our direction. I asked Seb what we should do, and he told me to act normal. If we ran, it would look suspicious. The woman walked with her hands clasped behind her back, like she was casually enjoying a walk. We kept moving at a steady pace, maybe just a little faster than before. I glanced back again and saw that she had gotten much closer, and she was smiling. She was looking right at me. My brother and I both answered at the same time, "Yeah." She continued following us, closing the distance bit by bit. When she was almost right behind us, still with her hands behind her back, she said, "I have to go to bed now." Seb and I exchanged confused looks. Without saying anything, we both started walking faster. My brother turned around one last time and said, "Have a great day, Mom." We kept up that quick pace for a while, and when we finally turned back again, she had disappeared. She was completely gone from the road, which meant she must have gone into the woods. That made it even more unsettling. It was already a disturbing start to our little trip. Eventually, we reached the house. It was clearly in bad condition. Ivy vines climbed up parts of the walls. Some of the windows were broken, showing that others had been there before. We carefully climbed in, trying not to cut ourselves on the glass. Right away, it was surprising how much had been left behind. There was still furniture, though it looked worn. Decorations were still on the walls, and small items sat on the coffee table. When we checked the kitchen, even the fridge still had food inside. It was completely spoiled. Opening that fridge felt like getting hit with the smell of something dead. After we finished looking through the first floor, we headed down into the basement. Just like upstairs, it was still furnished. The basement was much messier. A little light came in through small windows near the top of the walls. Then we heard a sound from upstairs. A clear thump. After a few seconds, we convinced ourselves it was just the house settling. There wasn't much else to see down there, so we went back upstairs. At the top of the stairs, there was a bathroom straight ahead. I don't remember what was on the right, and there's a reason for that. Sab and I went left into the first room. It was a bedroom. It was a decent size, but it didn't seem like the main one. There was a double bed and an old dresser. Some clothes were still inside the dresser, but I didn't want to touch anything. Sab stepped out of the room first. Then he said my name in a tone that sounded worried and scared. I looked at him, and he was staring down the hallway. I walked out to see what he was looking at. It was the same woman from earlier, standing in another bedroom down the short hall. She was in front of the bed, still smiling the same way. She opened her mouth and said, "Do you want to see what's behind my back?" My brother shouted, "Screw you," and shoved me forward to run. We both sprinted straight for the front door and rushed outside. As we ran, I couldn't help but glance back at the upstairs windows, expecting to see her there, but she wasn't. I also needed to make sure she wasn't chasing us. We kept running until we were far from the house, and then we kept going even more, even though I was completely out of breath. When we finally got back to the car, I almost threw up from exhaustion. We got inside, and Seb drove us home. The whole way back, we kept trying to figure out what had just happened. We thought maybe she was some unstable woman, maybe off medication, or someone who had escaped from a mental institution. Maybe she was living in that abandoned house. But even with all those possibilities, one question stuck with us. What did she have behind her back? And had she been holding it the entire time she was walking behind us? There were too many questions, and none of them would ever be answered.